Have you ever wondered why, year after year, the headlines are filled with news about the conflict between Israel and Palestine? It's a story that seems to go on forever, a complex knot of history, land, and identity. But what if I told you that to truly understand today's conflict, we need to go back over a century? And what if the path to peace is both simpler and more complicated than most people think? Stick with me, and we'll unravel this together, looking at the roots of the conflict, the international efforts for peace, and the very latest developments on the ground. The story really begins in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. At that time, the region we now call Israel and Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire. The population was mostly Arab, with a small Jewish community that had lived there for centuries. However, a new movement called Zionism was gaining traction in Europe. Zionism is the belief that Jewish people, who had been scattered across the world for millennia, should have their own national homeland in their ancestral land, which they call Eretz Israel. Spurred by this idea and fleeing persecution in Europe, Jewish immigrants began arriving in greater numbers, buying land and establishing communities. This created tension. The local Arab population, who were developing their own sense of national identity as Palestinians, saw this influx of new people as a threat to their homes, their culture, and their future aspirations for self-rule. They viewed the land as their own and resisted the change. So from the very beginning, you had two groups with deep historical and emotional claims to the same small piece of land. The situation escalated dramatically after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed and Great Britain took control of the area under a mandate. Britain had made conflicting promises during the war. In the 1917 Balfour Declaration, they supported the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. However, they had also hinted at supporting Arab independence in the region. This dual promise set the stage for decades of conflict. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, as more Jewish immigrants arrived, especially those fleeing the rise of Nazism in Europe, clashes between Jewish and Arab communities became more frequent and violent. Both sides formed armed groups to defend their interests and attack the other. By 1947, a war-weary Britain handed the problem over to the newly formed United Nations. The UN proposed a partition plan to divide the land into two states, one Arab and one Jewish, with the city of Jerusalem to be under international administration. The Jewish leadership accepted the plan, but Arab leaders and the surrounding Arab nations rejected it, arguing it was unfair and gave too much land to the Jewish population, which was still a minority at the time. This led directly to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. On May 14, 1948, as the British mandate ended, Jewish leaders declared the establishment of the State of Israel. Immediately, armies from neighboring Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, invaded, aiming to prevent the new state from forming. Israel, however, managed to win the war. In the process, it took control of more territory than the UN plan had allotted. For Palestinians, this war is known as the Nakba, or the catastrophe, because over 700,000 Palestinians either fled or were expelled from their homes and became refugees. This event is the foundational trauma for Palestinians and the origin of the ongoing refugee crisis. After 1948, the conflict didn't end. It just entered a new phase. Another key moment was the Six-Day War in 1967. In a preemptive strike against its Arab neighbors, Israel captured significant territories: the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, the Gaza Strip from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria. This is incredibly important because Israel has occupied the West Bank and Gaza ever since. Following this war, Israel began building settlements in the occupied territories, which are considered illegal under international law. These settlements are a major point of contention today, as they are built on land that Palestinians envision for their future state. Over the years, there have been numerous attempts at peace. The 1993 Oslo Accords were a landmark moment. Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, officially recognized each other. The Accords created the Palestinian Authority and gave it limited self-rule in parts of the West Bank and Gaza. The idea was that this would be a 5-year interim period leading to a final agreement on a two-state solution, an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel. But the final status issues, the borders of a future Palestinian state, the status of Israeli settlements, the fate of Palestinian refugees, and the control of Jerusalem proved too difficult to resolve. The peace process eventually collapsed, leading to a new wave of violence known as the Second Intifada in the early 2000s. So what is needed to stop this war? The most widely discussed framework is still the two-state solution. This would mean creating an independent, viable state of Palestine in the West Bank and Gaza, with East Jerusalem as its capital, existing peacefully alongside Israel. For this to happen, several enormous challenges must be overcome. Israel would need to halt and likely dismantle many of its settlements in the West Bank. Both sides would need to agree on secure and recognized borders, likely based on the 1967 lines with some land swaps. A solution for the Palestinian refugee issue would need to be found, which might involve compensation and the right of return to the new state of Palestine, rather than to their original homes in Israel. And finally, the incredibly sensitive issue of Jerusalem, a holy city for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, would have to be resolved, perhaps by dividing the city or creating a special international status. Achieving this requires immense political will and trust, both of which are in short supply. On both sides, political leadership is deeply divided. In Israel, a significant part of the political spectrum is opposed to a Palestinian state and supports expanding settlements. On the Palestinian side, there's a major split between the Fatah party, which governs the West Bank, and Hamas, an organization designated as a terrorist group by many countries, which took control of Gaza in 2007. This internal division makes it nearly impossible for Palestinians to negotiate with a single unified voice. The constant cycle of violence, attacks, reprisals, and military operations further erodes any hope for a peaceful resolution, hardening positions on both sides. So what are other countries doing? The international community, led by the United States, has historically been the primary mediator. The US has provided vast amounts of aid to both Israel and the Palestinian Authority and has brokered past negotiations. However, its role is often criticized for being biased in favor of Israel. Other global powers like the European Union, Russia, and the UN also play a role, often forming the Quartet on the Middle East to promote peace. Regional Arab countries like Egypt and Jordan, who have peace treaties with Israel, often act as mediators, especially during flare-ups in Gaza. More recently, countries like the UAE and Bahrain have normalized relations with Israel through the Abraham Accords, hoping that economic integration could foster a better climate for peace. But these deals have been criticized by Palestinians for bypassing their core issues. Many countries provide humanitarian aid to Palestinians, especially in Gaza, which has been under a tight blockade by Israel and Egypt since 2007, leading to a severe humanitarian crisis. Now, for the latest developments. The situation remains incredibly tense. Recent months have seen a surge in violence in the West Bank, with frequent Israeli military raids and clashes with Palestinian militants. There's also been an increase in attacks by Palestinians against Israelis and violence by Israeli settlers against Palestinian communities. The current far-right government in Israel has openly supported settlement expansion, making the prospect of a two-state solution seem more distant than ever. In Gaza, the humanitarian situation is dire, with high unemployment and limited access to clean water and electricity. Periodic escalations of conflict between Israel and militant groups in Gaza continue to occur, resulting in civilian casualties on both sides, though disproportionately on the Palestinian side. There's a growing sense of despair, especially among young people who have grown up knowing only occupation and conflict. Some analysts now warn that the two-state solution may no longer be viable, and they are beginning to discuss alternative possibilities, such as a single democratic state for both peoples, though this idea also faces immense obstacles. In summary, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a deeply rooted struggle over land, self-determination, and security between two peoples with legitimate claims and historical ties to the same territory. It began over a century ago and has been shaped by wars, occupation, and failed peace efforts. A lasting peace likely requires a two-state solution, but this is blocked by major obstacles like Israeli settlements, the division of Jerusalem, the refugee issue, and a profound lack of trust and political will. The international community is involved, but its efforts have not yet brought about a resolution. The latest news shows a cycle of violence that is escalating, with a political solution appearing further away than ever. It's a tragic and complex situation, and understanding its history is the first step toward hoping for a more peaceful future. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredibly important and complex topic. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more deep dives into the events shaping our world. Drop a comment below with your thoughts or questions. Stay curious and see you next time.